Hello everyone, and welcome to the DashCast, where we go about trying to find the most interesting people in the world of cryptocurrencies, finance, and business. On this episode of the podcast, we were fortunate enough to have some time to sit down with Alex Shin, the co-founder of Hashed, the largest early-stage accelerator fund in South Korea. Having contributed to emerging startups, well-established tech companies, as well as partaking in the venture capital space, Alex is taking his knowledge to the crypto space in South Korea. Throughout the episode, Alex provides a ton of great information on what's currently going on in South Korea and what's currently catching his eye, as well as providing us a little bit of info as to how he takes on his investment strategy. Our sponsor for this podcast is TaxBit. The 2018 tax season is quickly approaching. With the passing of the new tax reform in the United States, calculating taxes on cryptocurrency is complex and time-consuming. The good news is that TaxBit makes it easy. TaxBit automates the entire process by linking up with your exchanges and wallets, running your transactions through their tax engine, and auto-generating all of your tax forms. TaxBit's beta is now live. Sign up today using the promo code DATADASH to receive a 30% discount and a 100% money-back guarantee that your taxes will be taken care of on this tax season. What's going on, everyone? My name is Nicholas Merton here at DataDash, and today we're very fortunate to have a very special individual from a company known as Hashed. It is one of the many partners who helped found Hashed, and this is Alex Shin. Today we're going to be talking a little bit about what's going on in crypto Korea, to put it simple, some of the institutional side, and what he's really doing to kind of shake up the traditional investment in this new space of cryptocurrencies. So, Alex, thanks for coming onto the podcast. Really nice to have you.
Super cool, man. Thanks for having me.
No, not a problem. I mean, I'm really excited. I think, with the podcast, we've been trying to provide perspectives on a lot of different ends for cryptocurrencies. And one thing that we haven't really gotten to talk about that I think many people really were interested in back a few months ago, back in 2017, was the craze for crypto in Korea. So I'm really interested to learn a little bit about your background and really how Hash got started, but also get to take a little bit of perspective in, the Korean side of markets. So I definitely like to hear a little bit about Hashed and kind of your background and everything like that.
Yeah, well, I'll start at the beginning. But before we go there, we call December Kimchi Premium in Korea. So definitely coined that term for you. For me personally, let's see, where do I start? I grew up in Seattle. My background is in business. I worked primarily in enterprise SaaS B2B kind of relationship building. So I started my career out at a company called DocuSign, which recently did an IPO. I was an early DocuSign guy. I learned the ropes there. Then I went down to Mountain View. Was at Google for a while, working for the geospatial team, doing channel sales and stuff like that. Learned a lot. And then ironically, at the time I was leaving, everybody's going to Google Facebook. Actually, we went to Facebook, Twitter at the time. And me being kind of the sales background, I didn't really understand how I would do selling ads. Just didn't sound really sexy at the time. So biotech was a big thing. And I rolled into a company called Council, which ironically is co-founded by Balaji, who is now the CTO of Coinbase. And prior to that, he ran Earn.com. Right. So I was exposed to Balaji really early on. And even back then, he was running on The Office, just like randomly telling people, hey, put 10% of your net worth in Bitcoin. And Bitcoin was like $72. And I was, who's this crazy guy? Why is our co-founder talking about Bitcoin? We're at a biotech company, right? Yeah. So that was my first exposure, actually. So this crazy co-founder running around The Office talking about Bitcoin. I've always sort of known about it. I didn't pay attention too much until more recently I ran a company called Blind. It's an anonymous messaging community app for the workplace. So think Glassdoor, think Reddit, and it's all verified corporate employees. So it's actually really well used in the Bay Area. We have a ton of users at Google, Facebook, Amazon, Uber, Microsoft, Yahoo, and these are all anonymous users on an anonymous form. They're either on a private company channel or like an intercompany channel. And sort of there, I learned a lot about consumer apps. I got involved in kind of a lot of cross-border deals between Korea and the US, right? And then here's the tricky part. Early last year, I was at a cafe, and I had stickers on my computer, blockchain companies that I'm following or something like that. Mm-hmm. And I'm hearing about this Korean market taking off, and all of my Bay Area friends are asking me what's going on in Korea, right? Especially my friends at Ripple. They're 77% of Ripple transactions are in Korea, and they called me, why are your people buying our coin? And first of all, they're not my people. Second of all, let me find out. And it just so happens to be some of my earliest friends prior to crypto time. in sort of the entrepreneurial space were early OG crypto folks, and they were doing some angel investing on their own. They were getting involved in really early ICO projects, Ethereum being one of them a weeks ago, etc. And I thought it was a rare opportunity for there to be a new asset class, and Korea of all places to sort of be the eye of the storm. This is before the really big craze, right?
Yeah.
In the beginning, it was actually I think 12 or 13 kind of entrepreneurs, Korean American entrepreneurs in this group together on this Telegram group channel. And as kind of quantum and these new kind of localized blockchains started coming out, two of the guys decided to build a Korean specific chain, and that happened to be Icon from our group, right? And two of the other guys were doctors / software engineers, and they're like, you know what, we need this in healthcare. Privacy is incredibly important, data interoperability. So they were the first to dap ICO in Korea. That was called MediBlock, right? And one girl left to do incubation, and then the six of us were like, this is the last opportunity we have as Korea, as a nation, because we just can't really compete in frontier tech.
Yeah,
the country doesn't have data infrastructure and all that good jazz. But in digital assets, digital goods, this could be a really interesting opportunity. So we jumped in full force. We rebranded to Hashed. This was, so we've been active for 2 years or so. But late last year is when kind of the fund came together with the mission of just keeping Korea and East Asia relevant in this new ecosystem that's coming.
Yeah, I mean, South Korea in general, it seems right down the alley of South Korea in this case, because cryptocurrencies at their core are really digital currencies, or like you said, is digital assets. And Korea, out of all economies that I know, has a general public that's quite comfortable with digital assets and digital currencies, mostly from kind of the gaming scene and all the types of different ways that you can own digital currencies prior to cryptocurrencies. So South Korea always had that kind of stand out against it. And I also like as well the approach that you guys have with Hashed. It doesn't seem very traditional in the sense of how venture capital approaches investments. It seems quite out of the ordinary, really about community building, funding good projects, and it's not just Korean based as well.
No, yeah, I think for us, it's luckily the six of us, we don't come from venture capital backgrounds. We don't come from hedge fund backgrounds. We're really bad at managing money. But what we do excel in is working with founders, because all six of us kind of been in that space. So we get really hands-on, and the reality is if you are a leading entrepreneur in the space and you're really trying to build a network, the biggest question for you is how do you get into Singapore or Japan? I've never been there. Like, why are Koreans buying coins? So these are real difficult questions, right? And understanding who to work with and how is the big challenge that we try to answer. And the other big challenge in Korea is just building out this community. If you think about, and by the way, I have the luxury of, I live in San Francisco, so I have 1 foot in the Bay Area, which is the foundational technology capital of the world, and 1 foot in South Korea, like speculation market heaven, right? And the two markets are moving in very different directions. There's almost no doubt in my mind that a new protocol will likely be kind of developed in the Bay, maybe Berlin, New York, right? Yeah. Probably not Singapore, Korea, right? But what we do have is a nation that is super homogenous. It's hyper connected. It's 11th in GDP, and with the highest penetration of people who understand digital assets. So if you're talking about utility or early adoption, the likelihood of getting some meaningful traction there is relatively higher than anywhere else. I think the analogy I use is if 45% of white-collar Americans were trading crypto, I think Silicon Valley in New York would look very, very different.
Yeah,
so this is what's happening. Yeah,
it's a noticeable number. I mean, to really emphasize that 45% of Koreans are aware of or actually hold some form of digital assets. When we get that kind of point in America, again, you're going to see a changing point, I think, in the tech sector. We already were kind of seeing it. I think I saw a lot of traditional VCs back when I was working in the Valley still while doing my channel. I saw so many VCs overnight flipping over to crypto funds and taking that same capital and starting to invest and speculate on ICOs. So I think, there's so much money there, and also in the offshore world that's just ready to invest in cryptocurrency projects. And I think you're going to see it in America as well eventually. But it's a matter of, again, finding that way to kind of tick the mainstream adoption and I think build the value proposition. But I've seen it with Hashgraph. I've seen it with a lot of the upcoming protocols, Definity. There's a lot of big competitors coming up here, and it's raising some pretty crazy amounts of money.
Yeah, I have a comment on that. Well, before that, I wanted to touch on history, I think. Let's go back a little bit in time. The number one question I get is the whole, why is the volume so high? What happened with Kimchi Premium end of last year? Yeah. The real truth is it's gambling is illegal in Korea. It always was, right?
Yeah.
And when Ethereum dropped April, May of last year, we actually overthrew the Korean government with a big peaceful Gandhi-like candle rally. It was all over time, right? And because so no one was home in the government to really put basic guidelines around AMLs and KYCs and limitations and stuff like that. So whereas I went all in on Coinbase and I bought $5,000 worth of Ethereum, my peers in the rest of Korea were putting in hundreds of thousands of dollars into Ethereum and Ripple and all this good stuff, right?
Yeah.
And in a country where 40% of the population lives in one city, you can imagine they just lost control. And then we got into a phase where the local penetration was so high that the regulators were really hesitant in making any rash movements because they would just be voted out again or something like that. Like there was this big FUD about ICO bans last year that was kind of announced, and then like 8 hours later they said no, wait, that's not true, and then nothing was ever actually put into motion, right? But a lot of those decisions sort of got lost in translation and never made it out to the US, and it took down the market 50%, right? So these things happen, and then you have a company like Upbit, who is kind of like the Robin Hood of South Korea. They're like a fintech app, and they decided to open an exchange. They're like, let's open a cryptocurrency exchange, right? And then instead of, they don't know how to do this, so Bill from Bittrex hit them up, right? And shared his order book, right? And Bill's thesis was, and I think this is my opinion of what Bill's thesis might be, is at that time in the market, Bittrex was by far the #1 exchange in the world.
Yeah.
Binance was really early on in that scene. But instead of making a lot of noise about we're #1 and raising flags, the SEC flag, they sold their order book to these Korean exchanges. But then the Korean and then Upbit is owned 30% by the largest messaging app in Korea, Kakao. So suddenly you can log into this exchange, kind of like your Facebook login. And these highly speculative Korean traders who had made a ton of money on Ethereum and Ripple were exposed to 100 new altcoins that they've never seen before, and then it blew up, right? So from start to 3 months in, this exchange called Upbit, and they weren't on CoinMarketCap at the time. They went from 0 to $16 billion of transactions per day. And then Upbit didn't actually know Da Hongfei at Neo. They didn't know Jed at Stellar. They just didn't know anybody in this crypto world. So they didn't have access to build any of these wallets.
Interesting.
So all those coins stayed in circulation in Korea, and all the Korean exchanges arbed each other. And then you and all your friends or your moms called every Korean friend you had to figure out how to open a bank account in Korea, because we had this 48% premium. So that's kind of the history of where it's at. That scared a lot of the exchanges into sort of self-regulating themselves. And now we're at the aftermath of that.
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting to hear that drastic kind of out of nowhere, I would say kind of a victory in the crypto space for a company that walked in knowing little to nothing, and Bittrex coming in. I mean, because you're right, Bittrex at the time was really the top exchange. I remember, I still have the video up on my channel. Bittrex was the exchange that I would recommend to people if they wanted to buy something other than Bitcoin. And then out of nowhere, Binance comes out of nowhere, and Upbit, and all these Korean exchanges and Asia-based exchanges just completely dominate the space within a small period of time. So it's amazing to see just the kind of success stories that have come up in such a short period of time. The one thing I wanted to, kind of ask, you were saying that in South Korea, gambling is technically illegal. I see when I was studying traditional markets, I understand in China, for example, during 2015, there was a really big issue with average citizens kind of gambling on the open Shanghai Composite and all the major indices, and they were buying up their favorite companies. And this was the first time that retail investors, average everyday people, got their hands on it. Do you think there's some kind of similarities there in the sense that it was just a bunch of everyday people kind of getting involved? There was a lot of buzz and hype around it. Do you see any kind of similarities in that regard?
Oh, no, of course. It's completely speculation. Now we're at a stage where people are learning about what it is, but in the beginning, they didn't have time for that. It was just, what should I buy? What should I buy? What should I buy? Right? And everybody was putting a few $1,000s in. Some people were selling their homes, putting it into Ripple. It was a little bit crazy, right?
Gosh.
The gambling culture there is just very different. So that anonymous messaging app I told you about, Blind, right? It's actually a corporate app that a lot of Koreans use as well, right? And about 55% of white-collar employees in Korea use it. So when this crypto thing took off, crypto-related conversations on that channel was 58% of the content on that channel, on that entire app, right?
That's incredible.
So the whole country was, right. But, it's historically, that's always been sort of Korea's bread and butter. It's a hyper-connected country. This is why games, when you hit product market fit in Korea, the whole country's on board, right? And the trends move very, very fast in Korea. Like, I don't know if anybody's ever been there, but you come every 6 months, all the stores change, all the trends change, the fashion trends change, right?
Really?
The hottest new
So,
yeah,
so
it
like
just
kind of
comes
maybe
and goes.
the brands you're comfortable with might be completely changed. It could be a whole new set of trending brands and names that people trust.
Yeah, it's just really interesting combination of network effects and just homogenous. Like, people all think the same way. The culture just kind of forces people to be the same, to dress the same, to look the same, to think the same. And then when you have an opportunity to make money at this capacity, it just I think it was the perfect storm.
That's incredible. I'm glad more than anything it's cryptocurrencies because again, like I said, it does make a good match there. The thing I'm curious about here is kind of where Korea is at the moment. I think we obviously saw, like you said, the price divergence of the premium that people were paying in Korea, and we saw obviously the perfect fit there. I'm curious to see, how a lot of that supposed regulation you were discussing, if a lot of it is smoke and mirrors, a lot of FUD, or is there a lot of fundamentals there? Because I've met people who spoke at conferences who come from Korea. I've met, again, other friends and personal people I have who keep very active in the space, and I've heard differing things. So I'd like to, if you could provide an opinion on it and stuff, and just see what your perspective is on it, kind of coming from the institutional side of things.
Like, where's the market at today in Korea?
Yeah, the market and
Well,
also the regulation as well. Yeah.
okay, so we speak with the regulators quite regularly. I think this is kind of the same with Singapore, Malta, Bermuda, Japan, all this good stuff. There's an opportunity to steal some of this Silicon Valley thunder, right? By building out maybe a couple of regulatory sandboxes. I think Hong Kong's done a good job in moving in that direction. The last 5 major tech innovations, sharing, social, mobile, cloud, it's all Bay Area, right? Just perfect harmony of money and sheer engineering people. But now you come to Korea, and to be realistic, the world doesn't know how scammy it actually was in Asia. When you're in the US, you hear about a few of them, you're like, oh, that seems really kind of Ponzi scam-like. But it's actually way worse than you think, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and then when you speak with projects in Russia, same thing. Like, the Waves platform actually had more ICOs than Ethereum. They had 1,300 or something, 13,000 or something like that,
Wow.
right? But you've never heard of a coin that's built on Waves. So what does that mean, right? Who are the retail investors that are getting dumped on?
Yeah.
So jump back to Korea. The regulators are really conservative in that regards, but they're way more open to the idea than they were before. But historically, the Korean government tends to follow what a lot of jurisdiction movements that have, that are built now in China or the US. So in some ways, no one in Asia is really talking about securities guidelines. But if that really cleans up in the US, I think a lot of major countries will start following that model.
Yeah, that's one thing I've always tried to press people on is the fact that the reason why what the SEC says is important is not only the ramification it has on U.S. markets, but like you stated, that it's tended that some of the major financial regulatory agencies in the United States and sometimes in China, they have a kind of grasping effect on the entire world as well. Like, other countries do tend to follow those regulatory procedures, whether mandatory or not. But in many cases, again, they do work together. They do follow some of these kind of precedents for their countries alone as well. And again, I think that so long as you see, I think later on this year, you're probably going to see a positive tone come out of the SEC. I don't think it's very negative on crypto. They're more trying to focus on the scams in the ICO space, like you mentioned. There was some clear, obvious runs on the money. And if that gets filtered out, I think the SEC has been quite supportive of crypto for the most part, which means good for global markets.
And in defense of in Asia, now that I've spent a good chunk of my time there, a lot of it is, I try to give founders and teams the benefit of the doubt. I don't think they necessarily had malicious intent, but when you're in Korea and everybody is doing ICOs and the coin market's going crazy, you just kind of get rolled into that mess, right? And people just don't understand where the underlying technology is today or will be in a few years. So they come up with these grand ideas of grandeur. So that happens. There's a ton of that, right? And in other ways, we had this whole debate about Justin and Tron, right, in the Bay Area, whether that was a scam or not, right? And the dinner table is filled with very reputable investors, right? We do a lot of dinners where Asian investors and West Coast investors come together, and the opinions differing was really interesting. hey, he's an entrepreneur. He knows what he's doing. He saw an opportunity, went for it, and now he has capital. He's actually building something out. And the other half of the table was, the white paper was plagiarized. He raised money from public investors. It's different if it's 6 institutional investors, right? So these are just very different ideas that are on the table. And I think a lot of Chinese projects or Asian projects that are market making or liquidity provisioning, whatever you call it, they don't necessarily consider that price manipulation.
Yeah,
they baked out into the project as marketing budget. Now we're top 200 coins, and people are paying attention to our project. It worked, right? Yeah. So there's definitely a cultural gap as well.
Yeah, I think that's been a big thing that a lot of people still need to learn about, is the impact of market making, of again, and especially in a market that's so low volume like this, that a mass majority, I'd say, probably of the volume is market makers, people providing liquidity to a lot of these newly launched ICOs, many of which launched, like you've said, when there's such a saturation in a bear market, especially. So it's important to factor things like that in. And I've read the FBG article on Forbes. That was a big piece I know that went around, and everyone was looking at some of the quotes that were stated in there about how they kind of played Tron in a sense as a trade. And again, I think that's pretty tendent. It's not surprising. It's quite tendent and common in in these new kind of speculative markets like that, where people take upon opportunities. But it's something to learn from as well. And I'll be curious to see if that plays out again going to 2019 or 2020.
Well, FBG Hash, we all started out around the same time as a very crypto native venture capital firm. Their DNA, and I have a lot of respect for Vincent and what he's built, is trading. They went more towards secondary markets, right? Because that was an area that nobody else can touch, right?
Yeah.
And we're more entrepreneurs, so we went in the direction of acceleration and incubating companies and stuff like that. And I spoke with the reporter that wrote that piece on FBG and Vincent. But the questions he was shooting for was very Western focused. Right. And this is a lot like that podcast we talked about earlier prior to recording this podcast on Laura Shin's podcast on CZ. Right. Aren't these coins securities, or shouldn't you be following these rules? And CZ's opinion is, hey, the rest of the world outside of the US is also very big. Right. I'm building fiat on-ramps because I think this is important for crypto ecosystem. So these are just very different ideas. Right.
Yeah, it's a different type of world until the regulatory framework becomes established. And I mean, I think crypto is still kind of in that wild west mindset in most of the world, where there's a little less regulation, or there's not the SEC hawking down on blocking ICOs or non-accredited investors. So there is still, I think more than anything, I think we need it to be like that. I kind of respect the eastern part of the world for that, and kind of getting away from that Western mindset of protecting it at all corners, and saying, no, we have to cut out opportunity because someone might make a poor investment. But if you do that, yeah.
And to comment on that, though, and I'm not sure if you do a lot of personal investing in this space. In Asia, it's kind of, I call it permissionless innovation. China bans everything, and OB's 1,200 people now, right? So everything tends to move a lot faster. And then in the US, it's the regulatory landscape is definitely slowing people down. But then now the venture guys are in the game, right? You have ACCZ with Katie Han and Jesse and the crew with $300 million fund, and Matt Hong and Fred Usher coming in with a $400 million fund, and they're probably going to start doing a lot of growth type rounds, right? And the valuations are going from tens of millions. This is for open source projects, okay, with teams of 5 or 6 to 500 million, within months, right? And now it's paper wealth, right? And what does that mean? Is that really healthy for the ecosystem? So these are some really difficult questions. In Asia, it's low caps, compete in the secondary markets. And in the US, it's kind of a venture game now. I got in 5 times cheaper than you, et cetera.
Yeah.
Right? So as an international investor, we're stuck in this middle ground where, how do we tell this narrative of being a network participant when the market's moving in very different directions?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't see, you're talking about secondary markets. I haven't seen enough liquidity, especially in these times, and this is tenant with most bear markets, but in secondary markets, or generally on the open public markets, there's not enough liquidity right now. And that has set a lot of funds in a really bad position, especially, I mean, a lot of the key names and stuff, it doesn't matter. I mean, it was a completely different tone. I remember meeting some of the people who headed up some of the large funds in crypto back in previous months and everything before kind of the sell-off after February. And the tone had absolutely changed within a matter of 2 to 3 months. So I think a lot of of these funds are really trying to determine, how do we assess good projects? What's the proper investment strategy? And again, like you said, some of them segue into different markets that haven't been touched.
Well, I think what's driving a lot of those venture capital like valuations here, like the multiple hundreds or even the $1 billion range projects in the US, are because the funds took on such heavy losses.
Yeah.
Right. And they have a lot of LPs to report to. So we're fortunate, and we thought about raising outside capital, but we never did, primarily because crypto assets is still not an asset class in Korea, believe it or not. Right. And so there's not a lot of legal grounds for us to stand on. So we're like, let's stick to our own capital. Right. And we're already managing multiple hundreds of millions. So we kept it in that regards. And then when the market tanked, we were so glad. And I think there's some reputable funds that are being attacked or sued by LPs. A lot of that, in my opinion, just has to do with they're just not used to losing 50% of their investment within months, right? So that fear is there, and the funds having to react to try to build out new business models to kind of stay relevant is kind of a struggle right now. So overall, the market is. But I feel like it's definitely stabilizing out. Is that what you're sensing too?
Oh yeah. I mean, Bitcoin. Like I said, Bitcoin and crypto markets have neutralized a little bit. I think it's more than anything, we're just waiting for volume of some sort at the moment. That's what everyone's hoping for. I think the funds are waiting for that because they need retail investors, and then along with that as well, general investors are waiting for newcomers to come. There's just got to be something that kind of gives in the market.
No, I see. There's a lot of interesting movement in other parts of the world too. I think a lot of content out there really focuses on Bay Area, New York, right? Korea, China, Japan. But Vietnam is very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at gambling markets, people estimate that to be fourth in the world. So if it pops, it could be the next Korea, right? And a lot of the like OTC kind of trade volumes that's going on there, like peer-to-peer transactions for Bitcoin. If you really factor that out, people, funds that we work with, they're estimating that to be fifth in the world today. So it's moved up a lot, right?
Really, in Vietnam?
And Binance, Vietnam.
Wow.
And a lot of people are, and the young talent there, the energy there is very strong. It's kind of like they were never online for the big IT revolution, right? Mm-hmm. But now the blockchain revolution is kind of the new thing. So all the young talent's going to that space. It's very cheap. They're very motivated. There's a lot of well-known figures that are being moved into space, like Loy Lu from Kyber is doing a lot of work there. Took from Cambria, he's a Stanford PhD. He's building an engineering team there, right? And I think that's really driving the ecosystem there as well, right? There's movement in Saudi Arabia, Dubai. Every jurisdiction is sort of looking at it from their own lens. So we at Hash, we don't in Korea. We spent a lot of time looking around.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I liked your point earlier and stuff. I try to tell people this. I know you were mentioning how Silicon Valley and San Francisco are kind of the tech wing of the world that everyone looks to. But I have to say that as much as I think maybe on the protocol side, we might have investments in San Francisco and projects that are based out that way. When it comes to cryptocurrencies as a broader market, this is not going to be an America or China-based phenomena. This is going to be something that is spread all over the world. You're going to have hubs for crypto, and like you mentioned, in Vietnam and South Korea and San Francisco and New York City and London, like all over the world. And I think that's going to be really important with the key message of cryptocurrencies and blockchain. It has to be distributed. And again, like you said, it can come in places where we haven't really seen it. One that I've actually talked about a lot is India. India, I think Andreas Antonopoulos pointed out, India's got a massive market of software developers, and that's exactly what you need in the cryptocurrency space to build out these projects. So it's going to be cool to see different areas competing, trying to build the best systems, all the funding going into it, and just seeing how it all plays out in the end.
You're right. And one message I want to get out to a lot of the entrepreneurs that might be listening to this channel is the whole notion of doing hackathons in Asia, by the way, and people contributing to open source projects is really unfamiliar, especially in Korea, Japan, right? So that's just going to take a little bit longer. We're hosting a lot of events. I think a good friend of mine, Erica Kane, is doing a Buildo conference in November. So there's very few of these very developer-related conferences. And when you get there, it's definitely not like the Bay. And even in Berlin, I just spent a week here, and the ecosystem here is very active, but in very different ways than the Bay, right? But I think these are all very important ecosystems. But do bear in mind that Asia is a little bit different in terms of development, right? It's more look for consumer adoption.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing is when you go between different countries and stuff, you'll find different ways. Like I know businesses approach differently in China and a lot of parts of Asia comparative to the US and stuff. So it'll be the same with blockchain. It'll be cool again to see how different governments react, how culturally people react to this kind of technology and this revolution. So it'll be exciting. I got to ask you, Alex, though, I'm
Yeah.
really interested to kind of learn about how you approach picking out projects, right? We've been talking about how you take a little bit of a different one. It may not seem like the best way to approach it on an investment perspective, as you stated, or how a VC or a traditional fund would approach it. But I can tell you, I've met a lot of VCs and a lot of funds, like I said, who are not only down, but really don't know how to analyze this space. And I think how you take more of an entrepreneur approach, that's very valuable.
Yeah, well, the exciting thing today, for sure, is the level of talent entering the space is moving up exponentially. So that's really hopeful. The valuations are kind of all over the place. The projects at the same tier, in China is 30 million, in the US is 300 million. I don't quite get it. We look at. Luckily, I'm the least technical guy at Hashed. The rest of my partners are all engineers or data scientists, right? One of them is like an chief, and then he spends most of his time like contributing to Ethereum instead of working, right? So we're able to really evaluate projects at a technical level and at a source code level as well. So that's really helpful, number one, right? But we don't just limit ourselves to investing just in infrastructure. You see a lot of that in debate, right? Well, the apps can't run today. It's too late. I think you need a little bit of both. When you're in Asia, you start realizing, you see how popular EOS is, right? These centralized blockchains. People don't really care about decentralization or decentralization in all parts of the world. Whatever works, right? It might not be the best chain. Whoever has the most users might win out. You don't know that. So I think investing across the board is really important. Another really big thesis that we think about a lot today is entire new categories tend to emerge every 3 to 6 months that just completely didn't exist. Like CryptoKitties in December really set into motion NFTs. And it was called collectibles for a while, and now we call it digital goods. And when that happens, the really exciting thing is a lot of my friends that are tier one entrepreneurs in the gaming space, who for the most part dismiss crypto as mostly a scam, are suddenly super interested and raising huge rounds from Andreessen Horowitz to come into the space as well, right? So in general, we try to keep an open mind. We look at a lot of the different theses that are available to us today, whether it's financial markets or whether it's fractional ownership, programmable money, governance, etc. And we just understand that maybe we're looking at this at a too much of an obvious angle. Maybe there's something new that we completely don't understand. Maybe there's something that's completely digital native, right?
It's interesting. I mean, yeah, it seems like every few months there's going to be some type of new trend in the space with how fast it's moving. But I mean, that's one of those that I'm watching right now. You mentioned not so much digital money, but programmable money in this case. I'm very interested to see how peer-to-peer digital currency, specifically like big plays like Bitcoin or Litecoin or Monero or NANO, all these other different players, how they do in regards to the crisis in emerging markets, the gap that they're filling or they could fill in regards to the need for a store of value and a payment solution, seeing as you've got in Venezuela, hyperinflation, in Turkey, you've got a massive devaluation. So if this continues to spread, not just in South America, but also into different areas of the world and higher emerging markets like India or China, I think it'll be really interesting to see if crypto can fill that gap and get some mainstream adoption under its belt, really. And fill that need. Again, not everything needs decentralization. Not everyone values that. But I think one thing that I've always tried to push is that when it comes to money, when you've experienced it, when you've experienced seeing your purchasing power go away, or you can't do a transaction because a bank or government censors you, that's something that everyone can relate to.
And chiming on that idea as well, a lot of investors that we work with, a lot of founders that we work with don't realize that what they're building and what we're investing in, these are actually just experiments. Mm-hmm. And within 6 months to a year or two, we're going to learn a lot from it, and it will probably likely fail. And these open source protocols, no one might use it. Someone's thinking Definity's whole idea is that we build the best tool in the world and developers will just love it. Who knows? Maybe they would rather build on something that has 100 million users, right? And in Asia, we have this very different idea. So again, because Korea is kind of this contained market, when you have that high of a penetration, it's pretty obvious that every major company in South Korea is really thinking about how they're going to figure out their strategies here, right? Kakao, which is the second largest tech company in Korea, they're the largest messaging app, the Uber app, the music app, some banking apps. They're a huge conglomerate. They're launching their own chain, and their notion is, hey, yeah, we're going to try to be this consortium blockchain. And Korean companies historically are contained in Korea, with the exception of Line. So we're going to partner up with all these pan-Asian companies to build together on this ecosystem, and then we'll anchor it by maybe flipping open, millions and millions of wallets, and drop some crypto into these users who understand crypto, and we'll see what happens. I think that's a really important experiment that can only really happen in Korea or China, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, with the kind of major names that are out there, you mentioned Line, for example, the major messenger apps, I feel, are going to have a great entry point because, like you said, in Asia specifically, these message apps play such a big role in marketing and branding and getting things into the hands of a lot of people because you've obviously got the interface to get people engaged into it. So I can't wait to see, with a culture that's more kind of in tune with using QR codes in these message apps, to just see what happens, like you said, when you flick a switch and now 50 million people can get easy access to cryptocurrencies. That's going to be a huge game changer.
Maybe they'll actually use it. Maybe they'll stake it. We don't know yet. But it's one of those experiments and when we talked to the Kakao a year ago about this, it's one of the very few things that only they can do. Facebook is too big. They're a publicly traded company. They're kind of in the US, etc. Right? You can't do that with WeChat in China with the ban and everything coming around, and Line, obviously not, right? So it's just I think it's worth a try. Let's build a separate entity, give it a go, raise a little bit of money, etc. Right? So a lot of our investments are very long term, very understanding that this is an experiment, and very exploratory. We think learning is the most important step here. We've made investments in a remittance company in Nigeria and Kenya. We know nothing about Nigeria, Kenya, but just the whole notion of, can we use SMS to try to move crypto around? Because there's a lot of people that they're unbanked people, and expecting them to download an app is probably not going to work. Yeah. Right? And there's a lot of people crossing rivers to pay utility bills in cash. So that's a utility that makes a lot of sense. So are we going to make a ton of money from that deal? Probably not. Are we going to learn a lot from it? I think so, right? So we've made a lot of bets in Vietnam, some in Europe, mostly in the US, but definitely some exploratory deals in the middle of nowhere. Yeah.
I think it's cool. I mean, it needs to go into every corner and stuff, and I'm glad to see more than anything, again, whether it's a smart financial investment or not, that you're doing really cool things like obviously real applicable use cases of blockchain and crypto, like remittance payments. That's something, again, that excites me. I was pitching actually to a guy who was one of my taxi drivers when I was going to the airport in Ohio. And I was telling him how I didn't explain the technology of blockchain or crypto, but I explained to him that with Bitcoin, you could utilize it to send money across the world. And I said, what if you would only pay 10 cents on that transaction? And he said, 10 cents? No way. Like, he just couldn't believe it. But that comparison, the shock value of 10 cents comparative to, say, $20 or $30 through Western Union, I mean, there's a business there. There's a huge opportunity, and I think that's a good space to look at and everything. And again, getting your feet wet. I mean, you guys are ahead of the game. It might seem risky at this point. It might seem like it's not in your favor, but that's how all great investments turn out to be in the end. So I think that's awesome what you're doing, Alex. One thing I'm curious to ask you as we kind of get towards the end here, I want to ask you more than anything, as someone who kind of comes from that investment background, you guys have people on your team who know how to read open source code, analyze good projects, etc. I'm curious, what are you guys eyeing right now? As we were talking about trends earlier, what kind of trend are you looking at the moment that really is catching your eye and you think should be something to look for on the horizon?
There's a lot of experiments in the NFTs digital goods space that's interesting, whether that's just straight gaming, straight ticketing. I have this thesis where a lot of these ideas are like Web 2 native ideas that people are trying to make it Web 3, and maybe that's not going to work. So we're kind of exploring that space. I think infrastructure deals are very hot right now because a lot of really tier 1 talent is in place to kind of build this stuff. The tricky question for us now, and this is the narrative we tell to a lot of Bay Area teams and founders and funds, is, if you look at traditional venture markets in IT, patents aren't that defensible. If it was, then Uber would be in China and Southeast Asia, and we wouldn't have Baidu, Naver, and Yahoo Japan, etc. Right? But a lot of times, whoever localizes and implements fast tends to win. In blockchain land, most of this is open source, so that transferability should theoretically happen even faster. What's defensible with an open source network is probably some really deep mind share into very specific domain knowledge, like CK snarks or something, and community. that's it. That's all that's defensible. And then when you are a multiple $100 million project, raising at such rounds, I think you lock out a lot of really strategic partners in Asia and Europe that could really help you expand. Because I know a lot of tier 1, Gen 3 kind of blockchain projects in the Bay that are very close to squeezing out an SDK. And they need these dApps with 300, 400,000 transactions per second to try to test on them. But they all live in China and Korea and Japan. And there's just not a lot of incentive alignment for them to really try that out,
Yeah.
They would rather, right?
Yeah, I can definitely agree with you on the approach. I think I have a lot of criticism for how kind of the institutional side of things have been, kind of like how you see projects raising a lot of these big rounds. But like you said, the only thing, the real asset that these protocols have, outside of simply being able to prove that they provide value in some way, seeing as it's all open source, it's a matter of being able to build a community that sticks with it, to stick with that specific network. All cryptocurrency is really about attention. It's about attention and trust to a degree, and you can tell that by market demand, by usage, and a variety of different ways. I think there was an interview recently with Thomas Lee, the guy who's always on CNBC and runs Fundstrat. He said that the best 3 cryptocurrencies that have performed this year are like Dogecoin, Stellar Lumens, and EOS. And the correlation that they all share is the amount of new addresses that have been generated. They're the top 3 out of all cryptocurrencies. So there's a tie again with the idea that we're competing for attention here. You mentioned Tron earlier. Perfect example of that. Whether or not Tron, Justin Sun is a good CEO or not, whether or not Tron's vision is I know they've acquired BitTorrent, are they the next distributed file sharing system? Who knows? But it's all about retaining attention in that case. So I think that's definitely a good point you brought up there in regards to attacking investment and also making sure to have the right parameters set.
Yeah.
No. Well, anyways, Alex, again, thank you for taking the time. I know you're busy right now in Berlin and everything, but I really appreciate you making the time to talk. It's awesome to get some perspective from you, and also get to meet one of the head founders of the company that I'd known about for a while. I'd heard about Hash, like I mentioned to you, I think before the call, back in Chiang Mai. I met a few guys from the team, but again, really cool to see how you approach things, to hear your perspective. Thanks again for coming on the podcast. Really appreciate it.
No, thanks for this opportunity. We just really wanted the world to know that Korea Asia could potentially, or is, more than just retail volume,
Yeah, definitely. I can't wait to see the differences over the next year or so. It's going to be really exciting, but we'll keep an eye out for it.
For sure, man. Stay in touch.
Awesome. And that's going to be it for this episode of the DashCast. Thanks so much, everyone, for tuning into this episode. And if you liked it, please share it with some family and friends, as well as leaving a comment down below as to who you'd like to see on the next episode. Outside of that as well, I want to give a real quick shout out to Alex for coming on to the DashCast. It was great not only getting to talk to him, learning a little bit more about Crypto Korea, but along with that as well, getting to learn about his investment strategy. It definitely motivates me. It makes me more optimistic that we're going to start to really see some value coming out of the cryptocurrency space going into the next decade. Our sponsor for this podcast is TaxBit. The 2018 tax season is quickly approaching. With the passing of the new tax reform in the United States, calculating taxes on cryptocurrency is complex and time-consuming. The good news is that TaxBit makes it easy. TaxBit automates the entire process by linking up with your exchanges and wallets, running your transactions through their tax engine, and auto-generating all of your tax forms. TaxBit's beta is now live. Sign up today using the promo code DATADASH to receive a 30% discount and a 100% money-back guarantee that your taxes will be taken care of on this tax season.